Good morning, boys and girls. We are now going to be doing the story, The Great Depression, and it can be found on page 90 and 91. And we're going to be in your Article of the Week journal. So we're going to be in your Article of the Week journal. And this is called The Great Depression. Follow along. First-hand accounts of the Great Depression. The Great Depression was a time of economic turmoil in the United States. After a decade of huge economic growth, many Americans had invested their savings in the stocks. The stock market soared. In the summer of 1929, however, customers began spending less. Store shelves began to pile up with unsold goods. Factories slowed their production. These were all signs of a recession or a decline in the economy. Nervous about their investments in the stock market, Americans began to sell their stocks. When a stock loses value, an investor loses money. In October of 1929, so many people had sold stocks that it caused a massive drop in the stock market. The stock market crash of 1929 was one of the biggest crashes in history. United States unemployment during the Great Depression. So take a look at before 1920, between 1930 and 1940, and then after 1940. So this was a huge time span of about 10 years, The effects of the stock market crash continued to plague the nation throughout the 1930s. 1932 and 1933 were the years of the greatest loss for the United States. The stock market lost close to 90% of its value. Nearly 11,000 banks closed, and some people lost all of their money. Around 300 businesses closed. Many lost their jobs. In fact, 1 in every 4 Americans had no job during this time. A lot of Americans lost their homes and could not afford to feed their families. This article includes first-hand accounts from those who lived through this time. Emma Tiller. In 1934, in the Texas town, the farmers was all out of food. The government gave us a slip where you could pick up food. For a week, they had people who would come and stand in line, and they couldn't get waited on. This was a small town, mostly white. Only 5 of us in the line were Negroes. The rest were white. We would stand all day and wait and wait and wait and get nothing. Or if you did, it was spoiled meat. The government sent 2 men out there to find out why the trouble. They found out his man and a couple of others had rented a huge warehouse and were stacking the food and selling it. The food that was supposed to be issued to these people. These 3 men was sent to the pen. And we know that the pen back then was jail. Turn the page to 91. This is another account, and this one is Lawson Brown. We raised watermelons and corn, and you just couldn't sell anything. Nobody was buying any of our commodities. I remember we loaded them on the train cars and sent them to Chicago to the market. And I can remember we set them up there with the idea that they send us some money back. Well, the sellers went broke and didn't send us the money. It was rough, but everybody was in the same boat. Nobody had anything. Every room had a stove then. We didn't have furnaces, and a lot of people didn't have wood and couldn't afford coal. People were actually burning their corn for heat. You couldn't sell it, so might as well do something with it. We came home one night and somebody had broken into our house and stole all our food. They didn't want money. They just had to have food. We had livestock, so we always had meat. We were pretty self-sufficient in that way. The people who were really hurting, I think, were the people who worked in the cities, the people who had jobs at manufacturing plants that went broke. Dad kind of griped about it, said, all those guys who went off and made a lot of money in Detroit or Chicago or Toledo, now they lost their jobs. They came back and tried to get a job on the farm. This is a picture. Remember, you have a caption underneath. A bank run was a sudden withdrawal of money by many people at one bank, New York City in 1931. This is the bank, American Union Bank. These are all the people waiting to get their money out, afraid that they were going to lose it. At the top, the caption reads, in addition to the recession, the United States was in the middle of a major drought. Farmers and the food supply suffered greatly. This farmer is showing the height that the crop would typically reach if there were no drought in July 1936. And I hope I pronounced this person's name right, so forgive me. Angie Panjski Serto. Being one of the 16 children, my family was not affected by the Depression in many respects because we already knew how to do without. It meant learning that others too were in the same predicament. Most of our neighbors and other families could not adjust having to do without certain things, such as new clothes, toys, or gifts at Christmas, and all the extras in life. We had only the necessities in life, and that which kept us from hunger. My grandfather owned the house that we lived in. He had it enlarged and remodeled. It also meant that my older sisters had to leave school and go help supplement my father's income. He was very fortunate to be able to work every day in those days. He worked for the Pennsylvania Railroad as a trackman and walked to and from work about 10 miles. Many a cold winter night, he was called out to clear the tracks of snow and keep the tracks in working conditions, as traveling at that time was primarily by railroad. And boys and girls, what you have now is 3 different accounts, Angie, Lawson, and Emma. And remember, our skill for the week is our first-hand account. So we'll be talking about first-hand, second-hand, and third person throughout the week. And I hope, boys and girls, that you'll reread this story independently on your own, and maybe you'll do a little bit more research on the Great Depression that occurred and happened. All right,